Uh, Good morning, everyone. What a wonderful day. I'll just start by saying what an absolute privilege it is here to be speaking in front of such an inspiring audience, but also being involved in the Green Minds project over the last few years. It's a fantastic partnership. It's delivered huge amounts, and long may it continue. So I'm going to be talking about the role of urban landscapes in nature recovery. And at the heart of that is rewilding. And I'm going to start by talking about some of the definitions of rewilding, but also then get into some of the concepts, I suppose, behind it and what can be achieved. So rewilding to me, and many, from a psychological perspective, it's a huge source of hope, it's inspiration, it's about putting nature back in the driving seat. We're definitely passengers, but yeah, nature in the driving seat. However, it has been a word, and it has many definitions. There's lots of myths out there, and some of those have caused the debates to be, I would say, really unhelpfully polarized. So it has caused that unnecessary anxiety with some people. But let's get into the definition. So this is my most wordy slide of the day, so don't worry, the rest are all nice photos. So it's about a progressive approach to conservation. It's about thinking forwards, being informed by the past, but looking to a new, really wildlife-rich future. It's about letting nature take care of itself, catalyzing natural processes. So these are fundamental to rewilding in urban and rural areas. Those natural processes, if they are given that boost, are able to restore damaged, degraded ecosystems, just what we need. Slightly techie graph. Okay, so this is rewilding on a graph, and I've got to thank Professor John Lawton for this. On the y-axis, we have management intensity. On the x is land area. Anyone who's got a scientific background might notice that that's on a log scale. So generally, our nature reserves traditionally are managed, they're relatively small and often quite high levels of management intensity. Rewilding is about pushing those ovals that are at the top left of the screen down to the bottom right. Perhaps not to the Okavango scale or Yellowstone. We're not quite that large in this country, but we should be thinking about Knepp Ennerdale sort of scale. I thought about this and thought, well, where does Plymouth sit? We're about 8,000 hectares of land. It's quite intensively managed in a lot of areas, admittedly a lot less now. So it's a large land area, but you think about how people are managing their gardens, the green spaces, etc., maybe quite intensive. And the idea is to move that circle down to the bottom right. That's the process of rewilding. It's about putting nature in the driving seat, larger spaces, more connected, more wildlife rich. And I talked earlier about natural processes, and one of the fundamental natural processes that we have is what ecologists refer to as succession. So this is this inexorable push that we have, that nature has, that if you had Meath Quarry, one of our nature reserves there on the top left, an area of ball clay quarry. If you leave that, it will, given time, become a woodland. So early colonizers, plants like our lower plants, our lichens, our liverworts, they get a little toehold. They're able to trap dust, they die, you create organic matter, and before you know it, soils are developing. Our first pioneer plants, our annuals, they get a foothold as well, and given time, often a long time, even that lake in a temperate area would turn into a wet woodland and then a woodland environment. So that succession process is a really important process that we have, as is pollination, nutrient cycling, all of these things that are driving and shaping our natural environment. So historically, conservationists and landscape historians have assumed that everything would look like that. You know, you leave something in a temperate area, it's going to turn into an area of woodland. Well, if that's the case, then a lot of us were a little bit baffled. You know, where were things like barn owls, you know, in areas? They hunt over open moor, they like field voles. Where were nightjars, lowland heathland species? You get the picture. There's lots of species, and I would say the vast majority in this country, which are woodland edge. So something else was having a big impact. And in fact, we look now, and great work by Franz Vera and others, at a landscape that was much more of a wood pasture environment, something more akin to parkland, very dynamic, constantly changing. There would have been high forest, but there would have been a lot of other open areas. And these were the things that everyone was forgetting about. There were loads of, there's fossil records, there's bone records, great documentation, but landscape ecologists thought, oh, it was just all high forest. Well, no, we used to have huge herds of wild ponies. We had wild boar, aurochs, like the ancestors of modern cattle, wild bison. All of these would have been roaming around in large herds, influencing what our landscapes would have looked like. And that's fundamental to think about, how do we rewild? This is part of that constant change in an environment. And one of the first things to think about is, well, do less. These animals weren't just sat in one place grazing the same blade of grass every time, or like a lawnmower every couple of weeks going to the same spot. So doing less reveals massive results. And we talked about road verges earlier. I mean, it's just a joy to be driving through these areas now and seeing how nature can bounce back. So doing less, great. But then be like those big herbivores. So disturbance is important. Wild boar would have done that in the past. So these children on our left-hand side there are doing the fantastic job that wild boar used to do. They've turned the ground upside down and they've brought seed in. When you're in an urban environment, movement of seed through a landscape can be quite challenging. So we should do that. We're playing that rewilding role. We're moving seed around, not buying it from somewhere in Europe. We're finding it locally, like Billiken Meadows, and then sowing it in the right places. Those volunteers on the right-hand side there, they're playing the role of browsing animals. So when we're getting a lot of scrub coming up, actually browsing animals would have gone through, they would have browsed that and started again. So we're playing a really key role in Green Minds in terms of mimicking a lot of what happened in the past to keep that dynamic effect in the landscape. So some of you might be thinking, well, yeah, that's all well and good in an urban environment, but God, it's difficult, isn't it? Why don't you think more about the rural areas? Well, I challenge you there. The rural areas may look like a green and pleasant land, and in many areas they are, but we have massively simplified our rural areas and our wider countryside. Here you might have one, perhaps two species of grass, mainly perennial ryegrass, that's in that field. Most of the biodiversity there is in that hedgerow. When you compare that to the north of the city, amazing natural networks, woodlands, estuary, people's gardens, all of these spaces collectively add up to a massive natural resource. And with the changes in management that we've seen already, they can be absolutely overflowing with wildlife. And the time is now. We really need to put nature back on the road to recovery. And you may have heard targets around 30% of land in nature recovery by 2030. That's critical. To give you an idea of the scale of what we need to achieve, that's the orange near quarter in that pie chart there. 22% of land we need to bring back into recovery for nature. And the 8,000 hectares at Plymouth, is fundamental, absolutely critical to be able to hit those targets that we desperately need to achieve. And in order to do that, we need all of you, all of the communities that we have in Plymouth. We need to think about that whole wider nature recovery network that was referred to earlier. We have great data, and people are providing us with even more. So looking at this local nature recovery strategy, looking at how we can plan nature and co-create nature solutions within the city is absolutely critical. But you've got the building blocks, okay? So this is a really positive start. Stunning areas of woodland, meadow. The coast and the marine environment are world class. People are already starting, as you can see in this central image here, giving space to nature, not saying that they're weeds, they're plants on pavements. These are areas where nature can start getting a toehold. But people are the fundamental part of this, and people are inspiring, and they're inspired to take action for nature. So collectively, you've got that really firm foundation. And the firm foundation in terms of species as well. From the Hoe, not far out, you've got seahorses. I mean, it's a constant frustration for me when you see nature programs that they go off to these coral reefs. You don't have to go far from the Hoe to be able to see stunning marine environments. We've got species which have come back from the brink of extinction, or actually extinct in this country, with little egrets. Some of the first places they came back, they chose Plymouth and the Tamar. Back from all-time lows, peregrine falcons seen frequently feeding over the city. But there's red-listed birds here that we've got a responsibility to protect and to provide space for. They live amongst us, they're reliant on us. So things like house sparrow, swifts, that herald of spring, there's a lot more we can do for them. And I couldn't put a slide in without a picture of a horrid ground weaver spider. You have the only population of this species. We need to make sure that there are more, or that it's certainly resilient. So looking at scale, I think that's one of the other sides of an area where you've got really complex land ownership. You might just have a metre outside of your house, or even less. What can you do? Well, a huge amount when you start adding up all of those component parts. Now this, just locally to me, I live in Bovey Tracy. Tiny areas, these are road verges, okay? So on the left, bee orchids. On the right, green-winged orchid. That was just because of a tiny change in mowing regime. That's all. So you were able to start and see these amazing results. People's gardens, that's better than nature reserve quality. Certainly maybe more diverse in someone's garden. You start timesing that up and it's really inspirational. And then looking at the scale of places like Central Park, there are many urban areas which could give their hind teeth to be able to have that sort of level of resource. You start adding those up and you've got a city that can really play a fundamental role in nature's recovery. And now on to the slightly more radical. People love species. Species are inspirational. You know, I'm the same. As much as I like looking at a particularly geeky sedge that might be out there, I do love seeing some big stuff as well. Sea eagles, 200-300 years ago, used to be around here. We've got records of them on Dartmoor. That is a track of a sea eagle that was released in the Isle of Wight a few years ago, and it's paid a visit to Plymouth. So within perhaps 5-10 years, maybe a little bit more, you could have breeding sea eagles flying over frequently in the city. I mean, that would be absolutely mind-blowing. If you haven't seen one, and you doubt whether you've seen one, they're described as a flying barn door, so they're huge. White storks, so Charlie Burrell and Net Estate, you know, they've reintroduced white storks. They've been seen flying over Plymouth. Wouldn't it be amazing that those are the sorts of scenes that you see in the future where we're actually putting up nesting poles for white storks back again within an urban environment? And yet, I'm going to talk about beavers, but only briefly. There are a few urban areas which have got the foresight to be able to think about natural solutions associated with reintroduction of the animal, like the beaver, which is the real embodiment of natural processes. Their ability to transform our landscapes for the better, to make them super wildlife rich, is unsurpassed. So can't wait to see them back again, and long term, without the fence. And this is what they do when they're in a landscape. And this is East Budley in East Devon, where beavers are there in the wild. That community now is better protected, has better water quality, and better flood protection because they've got beavers upstream. It is challenging. It's really difficult for us because we're letting go. We're putting something else in the driving seat. But bloody hell, the results are absolutely worth it. There's one thing to just think about. So this is a great wilderness writer, Aldo Leopold, and this is something we've got to strive against. And it's that we all strive for safety, prosperity, comfort, long life, and dullness. We need to have much wilder brains and be supported to be more wild. With that, and we've seen, through the inspirational people here and elsewhere, what can be achieved. But we need to bring and support people to bring nature into their lives so that it reduces that comfort zone that humans can sometimes get into. And this is what I put as part of the problem. So the distance the average child ventures from home has declined by 90% in a generation. And that picture, I would put to blame for that. As a child, I wouldn't have wanted to go there particularly. I mean, it might have been okay to kick a football around, but it wouldn't have given me much inspiration. There's not much wildlife there. Great, it's green space, but gosh, it could be so much better because kids want a sense of adventure. They want to be a little bit scared and do some really fun things. I was more at home in my local ditch than I was in the local playing field. So let's bring as much nature back in inspiring ways as we possibly can. And I'll finish on a slide of one of the most exciting places that I've visited outside of this country. This is in Nijmegen in the Netherlands, so one of the most densely populated areas we have in Western Europe, more densely populated than England. This is in the Rhine Delta. The Rhine 30 years ago was declared ecologically dead. And through some works just like Green Mines, they've enabled that river to recover. They've enabled it to burst its banks. They had constrained it from being able to breathe and have those natural processes. And now it's great from an ecotourism perspective. It's great for the economy. It's providing loads of natural solutions. And it's even so well connected up into the Alps that certain species have found their way back down into lowland areas. So beavers are back in this area amongst, really in the middle of populations. And a few apex predators have found their way down there as well, including wolves. I'm not suggesting wolves quite yet for Plymouth, but it just gives you an idea of what capacity there can be when you've got people behind you, when you have the governance right, and nature will bounce back and bounce back really rapidly. So thank you.